Welcome to another edition of the Official Jets podcast, powered by Amazon Web Services, Ethan Greenberg, Eric Allen, and we're joined by Greg Nejmeh, the pro personnel director of the New York Jets. And we talk about free agency, which is around the corner. He did not give the Jets wish list, but that doesn't mean to hang up on us. All right. It was a good interview. It was a good peek behind the curtain. You will come away thinking, I'm glad I listened to Ethan and I'm glad I listened to Greg Nejmeh.
I agree with that. Listen, it was an illuminating interview because the National Football League, just like everybody else, have been dealing with COVID for the past year. So that impacted the way you went out and looked at talent. And free agency is not just a couple weeks in the making. It's a year plus in the making. And even Nej said that you go back and look at your initial draft reports on guys with expiring contracts. So I think a Jet fan or an NFL fan is going to come away from this feeling like, hey, I understand the process a lot better. And Nej, by the way, one of the best arms in the building. Back in the day, he used to help the coaching staffs out throwing the football to receivers. He was a high school quarterback. We didn't get into any of that with him, but he was a decorated player himself before he came to the Jets as an intern in 2009.
Wasn't he also the quarterback occasionally for the EA challenges? I think he was in the Buster Screen one.
Heck yeah, man. And that's just my guy. So yeah, I'll tell you what, the EA challenge, Buster Screen. And he's still in the National Football League now, but it's always fun to sit at home and say, yeah, man, I could do that. And I thought I was a decent athlete, but Buster Screen had me going one way, 100 yards, and he was cutting the other way, 50 yards to the left. I was 100 yards to the right. The athleticism pro athletes display when you're there, it's just off the charts. But anytime we're doing anything as far as those challenges is concerned, yeah, it was Nej was the guy. And we did some route running one time, and Nej was throwing
Decker, right?
Yeah, he's throwing 50-yard bombs out there, just dropping them in, tight windows and stuff like that. So multi-talented dude and a guy who's worked his way up here at the Jets. And we always think of Joe Douglas and the staff that's around him. Nej is one of those bright guys who is an essential part of what the green and white are doing here right now.
And I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that Greg Nejmeh, just like Jets fans, did say that internally people in the building are excited about free agency because this is a year-long process. And let's hear from Greg on what this entire operation has been like in 2020 leading up to where we are today. Can you start off with what your job entails on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I have to oversee the day-to-day operations of the pro personnel department. At different points of the year, the focus is on something different. So if we're in training camp, we're trying to address injuries that come up. We're scanning the waiver wire for players that can help us. As we get to final cuts, obviously there's a ton of players cut at that point. So the pro department needs to be prepared, needs to be ahead of that sort of stuff. And if we can find upgrades, we will. And then when we get into the season, we continue to do that in terms of scanning the waiver wire and trying to help supplement the back end of the roster. But we'll also scout our upcoming opponents and provide advanced scouting reports that we'll present to the coaching staff. As we get to the end of the season, we'll shift the focus towards free agency. So, depending on what's going on and what point of the year we're at, I have to oversee all of that and make sure that the rest of the pro department is aware of things that are coming up and understands what's going on with our roster so that we can, accurately evaluate all of the other options from outside of our building. So, that's kind of the day-to-day things that go on with the pro department.
Nej, before we jump into free agency, how much did COVID alter your game plan last fall? Because you talked about the advanced scouting and scanning the waiver wire, and a lot of that in the past had to do with travel. What was different about 2020 for you? It was different for everybody,
Sure.
Of course.
Sure. Well, there was a ton that was different. First and foremost for Workouts are guys that you want to bring in the building. There was a lot of restrictions that the league put in place. You could only have a certain number of players in for a given workout. That number of players had to, complete the testing protocol. So, normally if you needed to get guys in, say you had a couple guys that get injured in practice or a game, you could get guys in the next day. Now it was really essentially a week process before they could really be on the field for you. So, from the standpoint of the pro department, we had to be more selective. We couldn't bring as many guys in terms of, just kicking the tires on guys. We had to be more focused and bring, and the workouts had to have more intent to them as opposed to just trying to get a look at guys, I would say. From an advanced scouting standpoint, the league did allow, teams to advance scout opponents in terms of live looks. We did not do that. We felt like it made more sense to protect our, everyone in our pro department first and foremost. And then also, if they did bring anything into the building, protect any other people that were in the building. So the pro department, Kevin Murphy, Evan Ardwan, Ray Agnew, they do a lot of our advanced scouting, and they did a phenomenal job adjusting. We were able to watch more film. We were able to watch the TV copies a lot more than we had, and really pick up a lot of good things from there. And I don't think we missed a beat not seeing live looks. We were able to get everything that we normally would, and that's a credit to those guys adjusting on the fly and trying to figure out where our blind spots were and make sure we didn't lose anything. And really, it's a credit to them. They did a phenomenal job with that throughout the entire season.
With pro personnel, it feels like everything you just said, you're always ahead of the curve. You're looking ahead. Now that we're in free agency, what was the process of preparing for free agency like in a virtual space?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult to an extent, but at that point we had gotten used to it a little bit, Initially, when we all came back in the building for training camp, there was obviously the different tier systems and whatnot. And then we were all kind of together for a portion of the season. But as we got more towards the end of the season, focusing on free agency, we were working remotely again. So we've all gotten really used to Teams. And I honestly think, in talking to, everyone that was in the meetings, I actually think the meetings ran more efficiently through Teams because there was less just, back and forth. Everyone was a lot more to the point, and it was a little bit more structured. So we had meetings in December, January, February on free agency, and I was really happy with how they went and all the information that we acquired from it. So in terms of our preparation, it didn't change much. We just all had to adapt and adjust a little bit, but we had been doing it for so long already that it was pretty seamless.
Everybody at home wants your free agency ranking, so why don't you give it to us? No, I'm just kidding. As far as the prep, though, you just mentioned it a little bit. What goes involved in free agency? Because March 15th, that starts the negotiating period for 48 hours, and then March 17th, free agency commences. But is this much like the draft when we speak of it? Meaning that this is a year-round process, and even it goes beyond that because you guys probably even look at your initial draft reports on some of these guys who have expiring contracts and looking for that second deal. But can you talk about how a free agency is probably a year plus in the making?
Yeah, no, it is. It's when we're evaluating guys, I mentioned the advanced reports previously. All those teams that we're doing, they have obviously free agents or pending free agents. So, we're always focused on those guys too and monitoring how they're playing during the course of the year and all that. We certainly look back at the draft reports, like you mentioned. And, really we break it up by team. So each pro scout has certain team responsibilities, similar to how a college scout has an area or a region that they're responsible for. And, they do a phenomenal job of following and tracking the progress each player has made from year 1, 2, and 3. And it really gives us a lot of insight into the progress and the development of a player. So, there's a ton of information in our system that we look back on. But I do believe in letting the process play out too. When we start our free agent meetings for this upcoming free agency, we start them in late December. So the majority of the season has been played at that point. And, These guys have, the pending free agents that we're evaluating, they've had a chance to really, set their resume for this year. And we've also had an entire year to evaluate our own roster, so you don't want to be too soon on things because things can change as guys develop at different rates in different parts of the year. So we do want to let the process play out a little bit, but we'll start our initial meetings in late December. And that kind of gives us a lay of the land, so to speak. And then we'll come back with a more detailed meeting where we'll have, multiple looks on guys. That'll be mid-January, and that'll kind of set everything from there. And then after that, we'll start to get the coaches involved. And we just, wrapped up some of those meetings last week. So they were great.
A lot of Jets fans are obviously excited about free agency. A lot of NFL fans every year excited about free agency. But how excited is the group internally, knowing that there's a healthy financial situation and you guys are finally going to be able to get your hands a little dirty and start to turn over the roster and try to improve the roster for 2021?
Yeah, we're really excited. I think free agency in and of itself, you want to be aggressive, but you want to be disciplined too. You don't want to just start signing guys and accumulating talent. You want to build a team. And that's something that Joe and Robert talk about, all the time is we want to build a team and that's compiled of guys that have the traits that we want, So, it's not, fantasy football and where you can just go and sign all of these different players. You have to be disciplined and strategic about it. But we're really excited to get going. We think we've got, we're prepared. We feel like we're in a really good place right now, having, working with the new staff. They've done a phenomenal job with us and we're ready to go. We feel like we have a chance to really, hopefully upgrade in some areas and supplement in some areas and just add good football players to the team and good character players to the organization. And that's always going to be the goal.
You just spoke about the quality of those meetings, Nej. What were your impressions of Robert Saleh and then his coordinators? Of course, Mike LaFleur on the offensive side of the ball, Jeff Albrecht. You guys retained Brant Boyer for special teams, but what went into that when you get a new staff and they're bringing new systems here?
Well, first off, what we did was we got with the coaches once they were kind of settled with the new staff, and what they did was evaluate our roster first and foremost. You can't evaluate what the options are until you evaluate your roster. And so that was the first meeting that we had with them. And they walked us through kind of their thoughts on each player. We communicated back to them our insight into the player and how we saw him, and just had a really good, honest, open discussion about everything. So that was the first step in the process. The next step in the process was the coaches laying out for us what they want in each of their new schemes at each position. So their position specific traits and all that. And it is slightly different than schemes that we've had in the past. So there are some nuances to it, but the coaches did an unbelievable job of evaluating our roster and then teaching us what they wanted to see and what they valued at each of their positions. And we were able to identify, okay, this is a little different than we had previously, seen at this position. So we need to start looking for or valuing these certain traits more. And then once we did that, the next step of the process was, okay, here's the free agents that we want, you guys to evaluate, given all that we know now, and then put evaluations in on them and rank those players. Let us know how you think they would fit with us, who they would potentially upgrade on our roster. Do they fit our scheme, and where what we think the role that this player is going to play. And Coach Saleh, Coach Ulbrich, Coach LaFleur, they did a phenomenal job, as well as everybody on their staff, all the position coaches, to get to be able to do all the information that we needed in terms of evaluating our roster, talking about our new scheme, and then evaluating the upcoming free agents for the Jets. For them to be able to do that in the time period that they did, with the detail that they did, I thought was incredible. And that's a credit to Coach Saleh and his leadership. The meetings that we just finished last week were some of the best I've been a part of. And we feel like we're all kind of talking the same language. and it's a collaborative effort, which we're really excited about.
That is phenomenal insight from Greg Nejmeh. And, I'm curious, as March 15th is kind of around the corner, what is the room like? Or I don't even know if it's a room. What will it be like when you're finally able to negotiate? Like, I have this vision where it's like Wall Street, like you guys can go and then everyone's on the phones. Like, that's probably not the right way to think about it.
What do you say? What are you saying? You saying that's just DiCaprio?
Maybe. It's
I'll
possible.
take it. I'll take it. As long as it's not Jonah Hill,
But what is that room like, or what is that day like? Like, is there a time where everyone's chomping at the bit and ready to go, or is everyone a little more calm?
I think a lot of the lead up to it is really more where there's always, as right until you get up to the 15th, you're still gathering information. You're still, kind of getting your plan together. And, you need to be able to adjust and be flexible in free agency. But the more prep work that you can do ahead of time, obviously, when the day comes, you feel prepared and ready for it. So, when it does start, we are usually, last year until we had to go home, we were in a room together just because it makes communication easier and a little more instant. So, but it's not, it can pick up. It kind of goes in spurts. It sometimes is really quiet, and then a flurry of things will happen in a small period of time. Free agency is not. It's different than the draft in terms of less. It's more of a blank canvas in terms of the draft. You see things kind of unfolding in front of you. Free agency, you don't necessarily know what's behind door two sometimes. So you have to be disciplined in your approach and know how you value things and not let the excitement of the moment really come into play. You have to have a value and be strategic about it in terms of negotiating with players. And I think last year we showed that, and really Joe and Rex and Chad, their leadership that they showed throughout free agency last year. I expect it to be really fun, really enjoyable, but it won't be hectic or crazy because of all the prep work that's gone into it, like we talked about previously.
Are there parallels to the draft in terms of a big board? And then also in the weeks leading up to the start of free agency, how many multiple scenarios do you have to be prepared for? Because I'm sure on your list, there are a couple guys who are going to come off the board. They're going to sign with other teams. And then, as Joe has said, you all have to be ready to strike.
Yeah. We do have obviously our boards, and it's a little different than the draft because, in the draft, you'll obviously have your board and it'll be dictated to you. With free agency, you more are focusing on, okay, we want to go after this guy or that guy, our so-called targets. But there's things that are going to be out of your control. Guys can get franchise tag. Guys can reach an agreement with their team before they get to the market. So you have to be able to adjust and see what the next option is. And if there's options that you feel good about, then you continue to be, aggressive with them. But if not, you also have to be able to say, okay, it doesn't make sense to continue to try to, add pieces at this point. We just kind of, hit pause and let things come to us a little bit. And I think that's where, Joe's patience and poise comes in a lot of time in free agency. And that was something that, just seeing it last year for the first time was really refreshing.
Finally, Naj, we really appreciate your time. This has been awesome. Has free agency changed, especially over the past year plus? Obviously, we're still dealing with the pandemic right now, but in terms of the whining and dining, in the past, I remember that a guy like Kelvin Pace, who signed with the Jets in free agency in the late 2000s, the team took him on a helicopter ride of New York City to say, hey, listen, this is New York. You want to come here. You want to be part of it. Of course, you all are going to sell the culture that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh are instilling here. But how much different will it feel this year? And also, you touched upon it a little bit already, but that experience last year, doing a lot of this virtually, I imagine it's got to help you as you enter free agency this time around.
Yeah, it is very different. With the negotiating window being what it is, which is March 15th this year, you can begin negotiating with agents on contracts. Now, nothing can be signed until the start of the league year. But in previous off seasons before they had the negotiating window, you were trying to get guys in for visits and recruit them and like you said, wine and dine them while you were negotiating. It's kind of in reverse now. A lot of this stuff happens, for the contract stuff happens first, really. So the wining and dining, for the most part, there may be, guys here and there where it happens with, but for the most part, most of them get, most of the deals get done really early on in free agency. And, it definitely is more efficient, I think, because you're less waiting, things happen probably a little bit quicker. And players and agents, they don't necessarily want to wait too long either, because they know that teams are going to have to at some point adjust and go to their next option as well. So it happens a little bit quicker, and there is less, of the, kind of the ancillary things. It's really more down to nuts and bolts. So unfortunately, I won't be getting any Roots dinners this offseason.
What's your order at Roots?
Probably the ribeye, medium rare.
Love it.
Yeah.
That is a good order.
Yeah.
Is that also what you would get at St. Elmo if we were in Indianapolis right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely get the cocktail sauce too, but I would probably get the same steak order for sure.
All right. That's a great way to wrap up.
Yeah, you can't go too heavy in that cocktail sauce.
No.
Yeah, it's very unique this year, fellas, not being in Indianapolis, but the show goes on, and the show's going to go on for you guys, and we're wishing you a lot of luck.
We warned you it was going to be informative. We warned you it was going to be a good interview. We're glad you listened if you're still with us. And we've spoken to Rex Hogan in the past, Phil Savage, John Carr. EA spoke to them in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. We spoke to Greg Nejmeh today. We're going to speak to more people on Joe Douglas's staff as we head into the draft, even free agency, which is around the corner. So the podcast is going to start to ramp up between free agency and the draft. This is like the wheelhouse of information here if you're a Jets fan. So make sure to stay tuned. And before you know it, we'll be talking about who the Jets have reportedly signed, who they have signed, and there'll be new faces, new numbers with the green and white.
A lot of flexibility, the ability to strike. You have multiple holes on the roster. Joe Douglas has been forthright about that. And he has also been clear throughout, after he came on board as general manager, is that the way to get to long-term success is by drafting and developing. That doesn't mean the Jets aren't going to be active or aggressive in free agency. I anticipate they will be. But you don't play fantasy ball when you're constructing a team. So not everybody you target in free agency is a 5-time all-pro player or a 10-time Pro Bowler. It just doesn't work that way. You have to construct your team. And where the Jets are right now, they're at the beginning of the era of Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. And
I think that it's important to note that there are multiple tiers in free agency.
Mm-hmm.
There's the first tier where everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean most fans are like champing at the bit, like, okay, here we go. Like, who are we going to get? And then really the meat and potatoes of free agency are the second and third tiers, because there are only X amount of players. First of all, it's rare that very, very good players make it to free agency. So that's what makes free agency an interesting game in terms of contract and how much you pay players. But the Jets right now, projected second most cap space in the NFL. They have the opportunity, as Daniel Jeremiah put it, to shop in a different price range if they do choose to do so compared to last season. So we'll see what happens shortly. And the other thing in terms of our previews leading up to free agency, and the 15th when the negotiating period begins, and the 17th when players can sign contracts, EA and I will be speaking to external media to get their thoughts, probably on that's a little more player centric, to see who they think would be good fits for the Jets based on scheme and whatnot. So we will be covering that as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy couple weeks, and that's a great thing about the National Football League, that there's really no off season. And it starts with free agency, and then we move right into the draft. And the Jets are in a really, it's an uncanny position. It's a unique position as far as the draft is concerned, with 2 number ones this year, with 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, 6 picks in the top 100. Then you'll look at 2022. You have 2 first-round picks as well. And it's going to be fun to watch this team, this organization, the football brass navigate the offseason, because you're not going to get every one of your targets, because other teams sometimes they're going to put a higher price on somebody than you. A guy might choose to go to another team for a different reason. One thing that stuck with me that Robert Saleh said is that there's kind of a stigma or maybe a connotation attached with the Jets that isn't true. Yes, the Jets didn't win last year and they haven't been to the playoffs in 10 years, but he's talked about the foundation here and the people within the organization. And oh, by the way, guys have an opportunity to play in New York. I still think that means something to a lot of players as well. And when they have an opportunity to speak to some people in the building and the coaching staff, I think they're going to come away very impressed. I think the Jets have a lot to sell in the recruitment of potential free agents.
In 2 months from now, this roster will look completely different than it does. That would be after free agency, the first 3 waves, and after the draft. So a lot coming down the pike here on NewYorkJets.com. And that's all we have for this episode of the Official Jets Podcast, powered by AWS.